going again, yeah?
Okay, so Andy,
No, it'll be funny if you do it.
Andy will do.
Rebecca?
Just show us all drunk.
okay,
Hello. We're back again. So apologies about the technical details. We will have this film live recorded up on the website for you. So if you're experiencing difficulties in watching us at the moment, don't worry about it. We will have it all on a recorded film for you in due course. Anyway, Chris, where are we up to?
Just while I remember. Right, so we were at where we have the lamb chops cooked. We'll allow those the rest. We left off with the breadcrumbs in the pan. Right, so these are just toasting up really nicely now. You can see how they've absorbed all that fat from the pan. Now that is all the flavour we want. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the pan heat up just before we take the breadcrumbs out. We're just going to take these breadcrumbs. We're just going to set them aside. In a little pot. See how crispy those are. Okey-dokey. Right. So pan back on. Want that really hot. Now we've added a slight bit of pepper to the lamb. Obviously the breadcrumbs would have took on that pepper flavour also. We are now going to make our sauce, which is going to rely on the cooked vinegar, which in this instance we're using balsamic vinegar. We're going to come over with the pan. Again, we're not washing the pan, we're just using it. It's a one pan recipe where we basically stage by stage we take all the flavour from each stage. So pan on. Now we're just going to pop that balsamic vinegar. Now do not breathe in this vinegar vapour. It can be absolutely lethal on the lungs. Cool. All right, we're going to reduce that to a little syrup. While that's reducing to a little syrup, we're going to take our pepper that we so the long pepper and the cube herb. We're going to pop that into that. Really going to fire it up. Now that's just about instantly reduced to a syrup. We are now going to add some red wine. Pop that in there. Lovely. Adjust the seasoning slightly, a bit more salt. Don't put any more pepper. All that flavour that the lamb has left behind in the pan, the breadcrumbs took that lamb fat out, and now we're just deglazing the pan to make it lovely sauce. We're going to take some flat leaf parsley. Just going to pick a little bit off. You don't want the stalks in there. Well, some stalks are all right. They're quite sweet parsley stalks. This is just finish the sauce off. Set those aside. We'll roll the parsley up into a tight bowl. Look, just hiding behind there. Let's give that a nice little coarse chop. Perfect. So we have the sauce on now. It started to naturally naturally thicken due to reducing. We're just going to finish that with a bit of parsley. Smells fantastic. And we're going to take our lamb chops. We're going to take the sauce, which is the pepper and vinegar sauce. We're going to take some of this beautiful sauce and we're just going to nap it at the top with these lamb chops. Now, you might be thinking I forgot about the breadcrumbs, but I haven't. Set that aside. We're now add a nice bit of texture to this lamb. Oops. Get another spoon. We're going to just pop those over the top. That's going to give a lovely, lovely texture to the lamb chops. Right, now we have our sauce for lambs. It's basic, cooked in vinegar and pepper. Thank you.
Right. Brilliant. That looks absolutely delicious, Chris, and even with the medieval technology we were working with. So there we are. I mean, this is a fascinating recipe semantically because it gives you such limited description, but actually quite a lot of interpretative choices to make. It says pepper. Which type of pepper? There are a number of different sorts that we could work with. It talks about vinegar. Well, that adds a number of questions about what vinegar was available. We know there are different types of vinegar too, bear juice, for example, as well as what we would think of as white wine vinegar, wine vinegars, that sort of thing. So, I mean, from my perspective as a professional medievalist, you read these things in manuscripts, you read them in editions, but to come here and actually have your research brought to life so that you can smell it, you can taste it, you can eat it, is absolutely amazing. So Charlotte, actually, we have a question, don't we?
Yes, we do, from Eric Rickard. And he asks, what are your thoughts on toasting peppercorns before grinding them?
Well, thank you, Eric. What a good question. I mean, typically modern day chef would dry fry spices really to bring out the flavour. And you're bringing out some of the oils. You bring them to life a little bit. And I'm not entirely sure what the chemistry is behind those, but it's a fairly common thing, particularly when using whether it be cumin, coriander, pepper, or whatever. You tend to fry them for a short while, being really careful not to burn them before grinding them up, and it just seems to create a more aromatic type of flavour. I mean, in some ways, it kind of leads on to part of what we'll be exploring for much of this week is that when the recipes call for whether it be pepper or vinegar, as you say, it leads on to a bunch of questions about whether we should be using, what type of pepper should we be using, non-pepper, the common piper negra, or something more exotic like cubebs or grains of paradise, in the same way that you were talking about vinegars and so on, and whether we use verjuice or something much richer like balsamic vinegar and so on.
Yeah. And a lot of the recipes too, none of them actually specify salt, but we can imagine that that is a permanent addition to the medieval kitchen, so it's reasonable to add that. And breadcrumbs for thickening, again, we think that's one of those unspoken elements. How else would you thicken the sauce? There are other ways to do that, but we think that those are standard elements within this. We've added parsley to this one, and that's in conformity with the general herb palette that we see in the Durham sauces and Alexander Neckham and Henry of Huntingdon, and which we're going to show you preeminently in the next recipes that we're going to look at. We have another question?
One question from Susan on the flexibility of the different quantities in the recipes. Where in a noble house you might cook what your lord wanted, and adding a bit more of this and that. Say anything more about that?
Yeah, very, very much. I mean, this is again very much the ethos of medieval cookery, that these recipes are really very much an aid memoir to the cook. It was interesting that for all the recipes that were written down in medieval times, we would assume that the cook would be illiterate. We wonder who they were written by and who they were written for, but high status types of cooking, and it was assumed, it was the expectation would be that the cook would know instinctively how much to use of whatever they're using, and some of it depends on the pungency, the relative pungency of the spices that were, if they'd come a long way over land and sea and therefore had lost a lot of their flavour, whether they were actually requiring to put more in or not. So in short, up to you.
Yeah.
And just final quick one. Meat and Veg couldn't get hold of sourdough breadcrumbs. Is whole grain okay?
Absolutely, yeah, yes. I mean, sourdough only because sourdough seems to be the most medieval in a way, in the way that they didn't use so much yeast; they just used the dough from the day before to make their bread. But yeah, absolutely, whatever you can get hold of.
Great. So we'll now head over to Chris for the other two recipes on mutton.
Hello again. Right, so moving on to mutton. See, I've magically just transformed this section. Not really. We are going to do two styles of mutton. One is, again, a sauce from Durham. The other one is Henry of Huntingdon, which suggests mutton with cinnamon, cress, parsley, in a sort of probably more modern day roast meat and gravy, that one. And the first one we're going to do is the one from Durham, which is it's sort of more of a modern day salsa verde, which is sort of translation from green sauce. Lots of different herbs in there. But firstly, we're going to get our mutton joints in. Now, and when I say in, I mean in the oven. We're going to start off, I've got a couple of trays here. We're going to start off with an onion trivet. Now, we're only going to differentiate between these ever so slightly. We're going to take one onion, peeled. You don't always have to peel it. It depends what you're using it for afterwards. And we're just going to, I've left the stalk on, and we're just going to chop that up ever so gently. Being careful to keep a hold of your fingers. We're going to pop that into a tray. And that will be our first one. Now, this is going to be, this is called the trivet. It's going to be just for our first mutton joints, which will be with the sauce on Durham, the green sauce. We're just going to season that up. Okay, take a little bit of oil, just the excess fat won't go amiss. And I'm going to pop that into the oven. The second one is for the Henry Huntington, where we want to keep the juices. So we are going to do similar thing. We're going to take the onion, we're going to chop that up, pop that into a tray. Going to take the mutton joints, get rid of that bolt. Again, we're going to season up with salt, pepper, and this time I'm going to add, just for the hell of it, a couple of long peppers and some cinnamon sticks. Okay, pop that into the oven. Now, the Henry Huntington mutton has gone into the oven now. I did prepare one earlier, which I have here. So we have, this has been resting for a good half an hour to an hour now. We have all this lovely, lovely juice. There's the pepper, the long pepper and the cinnamon. Over to here, we have some red wine, which has been reducing just by about half. We're just basically thickening that red wine up, making it into a bit of syrup. We're going to take the juice from the mutton and we're going to pour that into there. And we're going to let that reduce down a bit more. We're going to turn up the heat a bit and we'll come back to that. In the meantime, we're going to make the sauce from Durham, which is the green sauce. You could use a pestle and mortar for this. However, there's no flies on me. I'm going to use something a bit more modern. Okay, so I've got a little vessel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with some capers, some Dijon mustard. Pop that in there, lovely. And we have some garlic. And we're going to add quite a array of herbs. Now, before I get all these herbs wrong, quite interesting. So, Professor Giles.
Great. Yep. So as Chris was saying, this is the most complex of the Durham sauces, and it's got a range of herbs. This looks very much like a green sauce, which is one of the staples. So we've got sage.
Yeah, I'll take some of that. Perfect. I'm just going to strip the leaves off this.
And we've got some parsley, flat leaf parsley. Again, these are the more common ones.
Perfect. Lovely.
Some coriander.
I do love coriander. Now, stalks on coriander are absolutely palatable. Make sure you put them in there as well, especially when blending it down like this.
Then we start heading into some of the ones that are not so commonly used for culinary uses these days. We have the lovely Ailcost.
Now, this Ailcost is really unusual, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of it looks like a sorrel leaf. You don't find that often anywhere. But you managed to get some.
Yeah, we grow it in the garden. Has a lovely lemony flavour.
Yeah, just like a sorrel, which would probably be more common.
Absolutely. Some creeping thyme.
Creeping thyme. Now, Giles, what does creeping thyme mean?
It's just a variety of thyme. So there's lots of different varietals of thyme. And again, you could substitute. You don't have to have that one. You can substitute.
Yeah, creeping thyme, eh?
Creepy thyme. There we have. Hyssop too.
Hyssop, excellent. We'll take some of that. Quite coarse the stalks on hyssop, so make sure you only use the leaves.
Then we have.
This is getting quite a cocktail now.
It is, and it's a heady flavour.
Yeah.
So
Smell.
have some southernwood.
So the wood, perfect. Again, stalks aren't very palatable, so just take them down into that.
Both southernwood and customary or ale cast were used to flavour ale in the Middle Ages, indeed. As ale cast
Do love a good ale.
Hops weren't used until the 14th century in Flanders and the 15th century in London, so all medieval beer is unhopped. And then we have savoury, that's the last
Savoury,
one.
that is the last one, last but not least.
And this comes in two varieties, summer and winter. We've got winter savoury.
Now, it's the perfect name for this herb because it smells absolutely savoury, doesn't it? It just really, you wouldn't go anywhere near with something sweet with this, you know? Right, so we have,
I'll leave it to
thank you very much, Giles. Right, we have all of our herbs. Remember, we put some capers, some Dijon mustard, and some garlic. We're going to take our blender. Now, a little tip, if you've got a cloth, you make sure that doesn't fall over. Because I do make a mess in my kitchen as well. Now, this is looking really coarse, but we're just chopping those basic herbs into a pulp. Now, we want this to be quite loose. Well, sorry, not loose, but we want it to be sort of a nice dress so we can dress that mutton with. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this. This is where sort of a modern day influence comes into it. We're going to put in a touch of balsamic vinegar. Now, it shouldn't make too much mess now. And we're going to take a little bit of olive oil. I'm going to pop that in there as well. Now, if you do make it too thick, worry not. You can take some more sourdough bread. Sorry, if you do make it too runny, you can take some more sourdough breadcrumbs, which would have been commonly used to thicken any sauce. And before I forget, there's one more herb missing from here. Well, and that's a bay leaf. Now, this is the only indication of the quantity in any of the recipes we've come across so far. It says 2 bay leaves. Not sure why, because it's got no sort of indication of 2 bay leaves to how much mutton or sauce. Now, bay leaves aren't very palatable at all. Lovely aroma, but what we're going to do is we're going to just take the 2. We're just going to pop them in there, press them all up, and okay, that's going to permeate the sauce. It's going to release the flavour. Take a spoon, let them submerge into there, and set that aside. Right, so that is the green sauce from Durham. We'll pop that there. Now back to Henry of Huntingdon, which is, you can see now, is starting to reduce to a nice, again, I did explain it's more of a gravy. We're going to take some more parsley. The addition to this is going to be mint, which I decided to pop in because it's such a good, powerful herb, and with this fatty mutton, it's going to work really well. And we're going to take some nice peppery watercress. We're going to take all these herbs together, chop them ever so nicely. Again, don't worry about how fine you chop things. I doubt it would have mattered. We want a bit of roughage in there, you know. Take that down. And we're going to come back to the sauce, and we're going to take the sauce off the heat. I think it's at a desired heat, thickness. I'm going to add all these lovely herbs, and just because I want it to sort of stick to the meat a little bit more, we're going to take some more sourdough breadcrumbs, and we're just going to thicken that with some sourdough breadcrumbs. Now, again, it doesn't have to be sourdough breadcrumbs. Any sort of breadcrumb would be all right, actually. And we're just going to let that sit there like that. Right, perfect. Okay, I'm going to wipe down the balls. Okay, right, so first one, Henry of Huntingdon. We're going to take our mutton. We're just going to slice this up. Still a little bit pink inside, which is perfect. Pop that over onto the bowls. Yeah, lovely like that. So this again was on the cinnamon trivet. I'm going to take some of our lovely sauce again. I will refer this to more of a modern day roast meat and gravy dish, like so. Perfect. And again, back to our other lamb that we just roasted on a normal onion trivet, which I have here, wrong size. I'm going to slice this up. And we can serve the sauce for this either on the side, on the top, in a pot, whichever you like. And there we have, oh, I'm just catching a bit of that bay leaf. You don't want to put that on there. That wouldn't be, you wouldn't be able to eat that. Then we're gonna, perfect. Right, and there we have our lamb sauce for rams, basically one from the Durham sauces and one from Henry of Huntingdon.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Those look absolutely amazing. We've had a couple of questions in about substitutes for the herbs. Now, the keynote of southernwood is that it's extremely bitter.
Yeah.
If you taste it raw, it really is very bitter. So I would go with something like sage, something equally bittery. So just put a bit more of that in. Savoury is a very unusual flavour, but I think a reasonable substitute would be actually just to increase the time, because it's an earthy flavour. You'd agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, and I guess the other thing to remember is this has just been a exploration for us of new herbs that we haven't tried before. If there's anything that we can take away from this is every time that you find a new herb, try it, because we tend to be limited and so used to just a small amount of herbs. But there were so many more. There was a good, twice as many back in the medieval period. And why not just try each one?
Yeah.
And also just remember that the things like southernwood, as you say, they're very bitter. But when they've been cooked and added to things, they tend to sweeten up a little bit, don't they?
They do. They do. So, I mean, in our garden at home, we decided that we just buy them. You can get them from most mainstream herb suppliers. So we now have them going, and actually Andy does outside in the restaurant as well.
Yeah, so we've got our own little medieval herb garden going, as you have as well. And yeah, again, I'd recommend anyone to try a few new herbs because it's well worth it.
Absolutely.
So I was going to say there's a couple more questions. One of them was, is a sourdough breadcrumbs the only way of thickening a sauce? And no, they're not, because egg yolks, boiled eggs was another common way of thickening a sauce. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Chopping those up and putting those in.
We do that.
We've seen that. And the other question that we had was about olive oil. Was olive oil common to the medieval period? And I guess olive oil was being used in Great Britain since Roman times.
Yes, and is imported. I mean, obviously, it's not made in medieval Northern Europe. It's a Southern European phenomenon, product. This also reminds us that what we're dealing with here are elite foods. So this isn't the food of the peasantry. In the case of the Durham sauces, these come from one of the biggest monasteries in England. And at this point, most monks are aristocrats or from aristocratic backgrounds. That's the same in Henry of Huntingdon as an archdeacon. So he's from the nobility, perhaps the lesser nobility, and the same would be true for Neckham as well. So bear that in mind, that the sort of range of spices and the other ingredients that we're using, this is for the elite, and olive oil would be part of that. That'd be imported.
Yeah. Okay.
Just another question here from Michael. Is coriander the same as regular cilantro?
Coriander is the British name, and we always say coriander here in the UK, and it's cilantro in America. We were trying to figure out whether there were any other obvious translations, and that's the only one that we can find, other than things like eggplant. You say eggplant, we say aubergine. You say tomatoes, you say tomato. Yes.
Let's call the whole thing off. No, that's not. This is great. Oh, sorry.
And just one more question. Struggling to kind of eat everything all in one go. Do things keep? Do these sauces, can we keep them easily?
Yeah, I guess they're like any herb sauce, anything that the sauces that we're making don't have the type of preservatives that you would have in some of the manufactured type of sauces. we would argue that the kind of rustic, fresh nature of them makes them taste fantastic, but they're not going to keep for that long. Put them in a sealed container, put them in the fridge, and I would suggest use them in the next 2 to 3 days.
Could you freeze them? Or?
Yeah, you could do, but again, try and use them fresh and try and keep making them. I guess that there's lots and lots of variations of a herb type of sauce, and the great thing about these is you can use them on an awful lot of different things.
Excellent. I'm just watching the film crew tasting some of the lamb there, and it looks delicious.
Just one more question. Should the green sauce be more of a kind of a pesto consistency or not?
I think that depends. I mean, I think the wonderful thing with these sauces, I presume they would have been a house particular favourite. That, you know, the Durham way would have been one way. The green sauce comes in lots of different varieties as well. So we'll show you, or you'll see on the pre-prepared videos, there's a wonderful green sauce for fish from Alexander Neckham, and that uses a slightly different set of herbs. So I think it's one way you can be, you know, go with your own flavour preferences.
Yes. I mean, the starting point for this, for all these or many of these sauces, is take the juice of something. And if you literally take the juice of any herb, you end up with something pretty watery, and so on. Particularly if you squeeze it through a cloth or whatever. So the degree to which you want to thicken them up is really dependent on the use and what you're actually doing with it.
Correct.
And just one final one: can dry herbs be substituted for fresh herbs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, dry herbs tend to be more pungent, have bigger flavour to them, and so on. But if you can't get hold of fresh herbs, then of course try with dry herbs. But as always, it does give a different flavour and different consistency.
Brilliant. So we're now going to move from herbs to spices, and it's our turn.
Oh, right. Is it already?
Yeah, it is. We're going to make
All
up a heavenly wine, or a heavenly way of treating wine from the Middle Ages, which is Hippocras.
So we're moving this way.
We're moving this way.
Right. So yes, Hippocras. Hippocras is a spiced sweet wine. And what's not to like about that? We all have our own versions of spiced sweet wines. Glühwein, if you're on the ski slopes and you want something to warm you up. Mulled wine, we have at Christmas. And I'm sure that all of you will have a bunch of different spiced sweet wines that you like to drink at particular times of the year or in different situations. And there was a longish history, I guess, of these types of wines through the medieval period.
Absolutely. So the version that we've constructed is actually from the 14th century, from the great cookbook Forma Curie, which is from the court of Richard II of England. There are other recipes for Hippocras as well. But as Andy said, there's a long tradition. Medieval wines aren't particularly in vintages. They don't really keep. They seem to have drunk them young. Not until sulphur is added in the late 14th century in Spain do you get them actually any records of them being kept longer than sort of 6 months or so. But there are lots of references to spiced wine in 12th century literature. Alexander Neckham mentions Pumont, and this we find in Old French literature as well. Don't have any recipes from the 12th century, but we do have lots of references to them. And in fact, Alexander Neckham, who appears to have been something of an enologist, gives you a long list of wines in his treatise on the nature of the names of useful things. So we have clove wine. We have other ways of treating wine. He describes a vin ferré, where you take a hot iron and stick it straight into the wine, and that heats it up. And so on and so forth. He's very fond of raisin wine. You'll see that a bit later when we're talking about fish. And he also particularly likes the wine from Auvergne as well. So a great many ways of treating wine in that period.
So this one, Hippocras, was really the mother. It was the mainstay of medieval kind of spiced wines, wasn't it? And this one originated from Forma Curie, which is in the late 14th century, and it uses quite an extraordinary array of different spices.
It really does.
So you're making these for me, but just to run through them, we've got the kind of Christmassy style spices, things like cinnamon and clove, nutmeg, mace, galangal, and so on. And then mixed with that, there's a kind of slightly unusual array of cardamom, white pepper, and marjoram, as well as spikenard. Now, spikenard, Charles, what do we make of that?
Spikenard, yeah, it's a bit difficult to get hold of it. You mostly find it in oils for perfumes these days, but it's a valerian, so a very reasonable substitute would be rosemary. And you'll find that that gives it this wonderful infusion. It's really quite amazing. So we've added some of that. We're going to just pound all of this together with some powdered ginger as well. And once I've bashed this up,
and you've got a mixture here of both hard spices and ground spices, and one of the things that we've found when making Hippocras is that if you use hard spices, you tend to get a kind of cleaner flavour with it, but not quite so pungent, not quite so strong. Yes, that's right. And there's an issue when it comes to filtration that we'll go on to in a second. So
I forgot to add some dried galangal.
Galangal, yep.
Galangal here. Put that in, and this is. To that, I'm just going to add a little bit of red wine to make a paste.
So the idea at this point is that you add some of the red wine in to make this paste, and then we're going to add that to the rest of the mixture. So we've got here the remainder of a bottle of wine, and we've used a old dissolve this sugar. We've used white sugar to give it quite a clean flavour. And then into that, we are going to add this spice mixture here.
So that addition of sugar marks this out as a recipe from the later Middle Ages. Our 12th century recipes, you'll notice, don't have any sweetness apart from honey. Now, sugar cane arrives in Europe. It's being made in the Middle East, originally from Far East Indonesia and then China. So it is in Europe from the middle of the 13th century onwards, and you watch recipes get sweeter indeed as the Middle Ages proceed. So that's an interesting indicator that this must be a slightly later recipe.
Okay. So at this point, we're allowing that kind of slightly unusual mixture of herbs to just infuse into this, and you can really leave it for as long as you want, but we're going to leave it for, we would normally leave it for around 20 minutes or so.
We're not going to do that now.
And at that point, we're going to filter it. Now, everyone has their own way of filtering. This seems to be the easiest way for this, seems to be using a coffee filter. We've put a double one in there onto a sieve. I'm just going to pour that over like so. And just like this. Here you get this a bit better. Like that. The one thing that it's probably worth noting that if you use all ground spices, and there's nothing wrong with that, it does give you, as I say, quite a thicker flavour, is that the whole mixture can go really quite viscous and gloopy and becomes really extremely difficult to filter. I don't know what the process is and why it does it, but again, just be a little bit aware of that. So we're going to leave that now to just filter itself through. You can see it coming through here. Now there will be a sediment thrown at this point, so we'll leave it to settle a little while. And once we've done that, we're going to either decant it into a bottle or perhaps filter it and to just repeat the process again.
Yeah, you could do that 2 or 3 times. So that's what it will look like. That will take quite a long time to filter through, and that's how you get that lovely. That's how you get that lovely flavour. This cold filtered wine. What we would have, we're going to put this into a bottle.
Yeah.
And we're going to leave that for a week.
Yeah.
It will just be infusing away, and then we will tell you on Friday how you might deal with that one, because there's a couple of tricks with Hippocras right at the end as well. It's called Hippocras because of the, as I said, it's cold filtered. It's not a mulled wine in that sense. And the image of Hippocrates, the famous Greek doctor, he always had very long sleeves, and it's the sleeves through which you filter these spices, so that's the name Hippocras from Hippocrates, which is another reminder, as you will have seen on the website, this dialogue between gastronomic recipes and medicinal recipes. And in the 12th century, we're not quite at medicalized food. That comes a little later in the 13th and 14th centuries, but it's a very interesting dialogue. And we'll see that even more so in the next recipe, the last one for today, which is the one for conserved ginger. But Charlotte's going to be presenting that one, so I shall decide here at this point.
All right.
I'm going to take my Hippocras with me.
Okay, so I'm just going to set this aside. As you can see, it's taking a little bit of time to filter through, and that's pretty normal. So that will be consumed cold, which is the main thing about this. So we're now on to conserved ginger. So this recipe is the last one of Durham sauces. Now, hopefully you will have familiarized yourself to an extent with these Durham sauces, and you realize that a lot of them are similar in the way that they use herbs, vinegar and pepper in one combination or another. This one is unusual in that it uses ginger. Not only uses ginger, but it uses honey. It's the only recipe within the Durham collection that has any form of sweetener, and it's also the last one. And bearing in mind that this Durham collection is within a medical manuscript, then it may be on the cusp of a medicinal type of preparation of some sort. But the reason why we've included it is because it actually tastes delicious. So why not use it in its culinary capacity? So we're actually going to show you how to make this. So I'm going to just take some ginger. Okay, here, some nice bit of fresh ginger, and the recipe actually asks us to soak it in water until it's green. And we think the reason for that is that perhaps, like the spices, a lot of ginger would have spent longer coming over from sea or land to the merchant houses, and might have been a little bit dried up by the time that it arrived with us. So they reconstitute it, rehydrate it using water. You know, this is perfectly fresh, so we don't need to do that, but that's what the recipe calls for. So I'm just going to peel this, and my preferred method is using a spoon, a blunt spoon. Seems to be a fairly good way of doing it. Charlotte, you're going to just take us a little bit through the spices that were in this.
Yeah, so thanks, Andy. We've got ground galingale, some ground cinnamon, some zedgery and some cloves, and a little bit of long pepper. Now, these need to be all ground up, like this. Now, I have had a little bit of help beforehand, so they are almost there. But as soon as they get to their powdered form, they'll then be joining the ginger. Okay. But just to pause a second about the spices, this recipe is from the 12th century, and they're also the same herbs that are found in an old 12th century old French tale, Les Contes de Floie et Blanchefleur, and where they crop up in the emir's wondrous eastern garden, which was possibly in Babylon or somewhere. And it's amazing. It's a fascinating link to find in the literature and the gardens and the food all coming together in this way. In this recipe, it's fascinating to see such things coming together.
And again, we see that often, I guess, that culinary expression is used in literature, and we see that in a number of different texts, don't we? So, okay, so you've got the herbs, you've got the spices, and I got the ginger here, so I've just cut that up. So the next thing is honey. And the recipe suggests that we bring the honey up to a simmer, and then we skim it. And I think part of the reason for that is that perhaps honey wasn't quite as pure as the stuff we get these days, so they wanted to just make sure that they'd skimmed off any impurities on it. I don't think, a bit like steeping the ginger in water, I'm not sure that's entirely necessary, but it's worth pointing out that that's what the recipe asks us to do. So, other thing with this that need to, you know, for purposes of live TV, is that I don't want to bring this up to a simmer and then end up burning my hands off in it. So let's assume for the purposes of this that what we have done is we've brought up, we've let it cool, and here it is, and now we're going to add our ginger into this. So the recipe calls for massaging this ginger, so it's time to get your hand stuck in, basically, and we're massaging this ginger into this, making sure that it's it all has amalgamated and as well absorbed into that. It then asks us to leave that overnight. Okay, so again, for the purposes of TV, here's one that I made earlier, and we're going to assume this has been allowed to steep in the ginger for 24 hours. At this point, the recipe asks us to take this out, so I'm just going to take this out like this, and again, we bring it up to temperatures, we bring it up to a simmering point, and as it is cooling, we then put the spices back into here. So this is the time to use the spices. So if we can just use those, that's lovely. Thank you very much. All right, put that down. We've made this several times, and one of the things that we've realised is that spices at this point can be really pungent. So the thing that's caught us out more than once is the addition of cloves. So clove can be overpowering in any kind of spice mixture. So we have gone a little bit careful on the clove, but it says whatever you have, use the equal quantities of black pepper. So we've put black pepper, long black pepper into this one, haven't you? So we're going to put that into here, like that. Mix that in there into the strong, sweet honey type of sauce, and then we're going to add our ginger back into this at this point. So here we go. Again, as I say, just be a little bit careful that if it is hot, then please be careful not to burn your fingers. So what we're going to do with this now is to put it into a jar, and we're then going to leave that again to the end of the week. So here we go. There we are. So that is our conserved ginger, which we'll try and we'll talk about at the end of the week. But we have been trying this, and it's absolutely fantastic. A number of different things like cheese. We've tried it with goat cheese. We've tried it for breakfast with yogurt and so on, and I must say, and toast as well. Absolutely delicious. So there we go. Giles, have you tried it?
Yeah, no, I love the conserved ginger. And again, this is one that I find absolutely fascinating. As you said, it's the last of the Durham sauces, last of the gastronomic sauces, and it's the bit where it bridges into the back into the medicinal connection. And there is this very interesting dialogue then between medicinal recipes and gastronomic. It's also very close to a contemporary aphrodisiac recipe, so be careful with this one. And as I said, there is this continual dialogue between medical uses, the medical virtues of all of these herbs and spices, even the meats actually within the humoral system. So this is balancing the 4 humors in the body, which are related to the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water. That actually, so lamb will be different humoral complex to chicken, makes chicken easier to eat and easier for particularly the infirm to take. So there is a medical element to these. What we think in the 12th century, though, is this isn't the kind of the rule of health genre that you get in the 13th and 14th century. So this is a much more creative dialogue between the cook and the doctor. And indeed, that's what Henry of Huntingdon, on that earlier recipe that we had with the mutton, exactly what he does. So there's massive verse herbal, it's 8 books, and there's a couple of culinary recipes. But that's the point where Henry invokes the doctor, or actually the god Apollo invokes the cook, to come in and argue with the doctors about the other ways in which you can use the virtues of parsley in this case. So there's this wonderful area of research and understanding how food and health and gastronomy and medical knowledge go together. It's a really interesting reflection on that period, but also we have many of the same concerns today. So a nice mirror to hold up to society.
Yes, yeah. So there we are. We're drawing to the end of the first day, and I hope it's been as fun for you as it has been for us here. I'd like to thank, first of all, that phone for just going there. Hey, it's all happening, isn't it?
It's dinner time.
I'd like to thank Chef Chris for being the true professional today. That was great. For Alan, our amazing technician here, Charles and Charlotte. So that is lamb 3 ways, hippocras and conserved ginger. Tomorrow we'll be on a live Zoom at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock British time, UK time. And we'll be repeating the same on Thursday at 5 o'clock, and then we're back to a live show at 5 o'clock on Friday. So we'll look forward to seeing you all then.
Great.
Otherwise, if there's nothing else, it's goodbye from us, and thank you very much for watching.